If we talk about 1/3 of the women in the military sexually assaulted, and we talk about fighting for women's rights in Afghanistan, I think we're only living the hypocrisy that is being promoted. And the reality is that this right to heal for service members and veterans isn't just a right to heal for us, but it's a right for our whole communities and society to start healing, because militarism isn't something that just service members are dealing with, it's something that we're all dealing with. We developed what we call as our Operation Recovery Campaign. It's a campaign for veterans and service members' right to heal, and it's a campaign to stop the deployment of traumatized troops. And in 2010, we launched that campaign by going to Congress, and we delivered notifications to everyone that's part of the Senate Armed Service Committee that we wanted information around what they knew about the deployment of traumatized troops and what research was going on. And as soon as we had done that, a father had seen us in the news, and his son was home on leave from Afghanistan. His name was Jeff Hanks. He had recently been in an explosion in Afghanistan. He was dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder and with a traumatic brain injury. And when he was at home, his wife, brought him to the emergency room because she's like, "You need help." And despite the fact that he was in the emergency room, the doctors say you have PTSD, he has TBI, he needs treatment, his command said he needs to redeploy and go back to Afghanistan. And so we worked with this soldier to go AWOL, and we supported him in that effort, and we support him in the effort of returning himself back in to Fort Campbell on Veterans Day of 2010. And even after that, and raising all this awareness, and he was on PBS and all these other things, they still wanted to deploy him. So we rose a public awareness campaign and put pressure on his commander, captain, and forced him to not deploy Jeff Hanks. That research, and from that experience, we started to learn about what was happening at Fort Campbell, what was happening at Fort Joint Base Lewis McChord, what was happening at Fort Hood, what was happening at other military bases across the country. And what we found was that the worst purveyor of these issues of abusing service members' right to heal is at Fort Hood. Fort Hood is the largest military installation in the United States, and currently it has the highest suicide rate of any military installation, and they have the highest mobilization rate. And so we began to work with a coffee house called Under the Hood Cafe on a campaign and doing organizing jobs down there to organize active duty service members around 3 simple things. Basically, to win their right to heal around post-traumatic stress disorder, military sexual trauma, and traumatic brain injury. So to kind of like educate the community on like what these issues are and stuff. There's been this portfolio created, and I'm just going to pass some of these around. I'm going to ask folks to share some of these posters and read out what they say, and show them to other folks. Let's see here. There you go. Ken, you want to take that one? Would you mind read that one and showing it to everybody?
It says you can't just say there is help for those that ask when you know that less than 15% of survivors report sexual assault in the military. That's why it took me 5 years to admit that I had been raped. Maggie Martin.
Hannah, would you read the one we have there?
It says war is trauma.
Stop sexual assault in the military. I said, I can't do it, I can't go. I looked at my mom and I told her, I can't go. She said, seriously? I just felt my heart was pounding and I felt like I was just frozen. I think I could kind of stutter when I said I can't do it. It was hard to get the words out, especially with Suzanne Swift in 2006 on her decision to go AWOL before her redeployment to Iraq, where she had been sexually assaulted by 3 men in her command. She was apprehended and imprisoned briefly in January 2007. She remained on active duty until 2009 and has been active in anti-war and anti-rape protests. 1/3 of women in the military are sexually assaulted. The military has diagnosed as military sexual trauma. According to the VA, more than 48,000 female veterans screened positive for military sexual trauma in 2008.
To 50% of all U.S. military service members deployed to Iraq and/or Afghanistan suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder.
I'd rather do my time in jail than be a party to the racism I saw in Iraq. As an African American, I grew up with racism, but in Iraq I saw the same kind of abuse and mistreatment. Only this was U.S. enlisted soldiers and American contractors, like security forces, abusing Iraqis. Rodney Watson, 29 years old, Army specialist from Kansas City, Missouri, served 12 months in Iraq, has refused to return, and is currently seeking refuge near Vancouver, Canada.
PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. How is this a disorder? What part of being emotionally and spiritually affected by gross violence is disorder? How about going to war and coming home with a clear conscience disorder? I think that would be far more appropriate. Matt Howard, Iraq Veterans Against the War, Operation Recovery, IVAW.org, 2010.
This is Eugene Cherry, fighting for the right to heal. And it says, here's a young man, a combat veteran who has clearly sacrificed a great deal for his country. It appalls me that they are treating him like a criminal when he needs mental help. And that's from Hannah Frisch, who's here with us, a clinical psychologist who diagnosed Eugene Cherry with post-traumatic stress disorder and major depression.
U.S. female soldiers in Iraq are more likely to be raped by a fellow soldier than killed by an enemy. Believe and support survivors of military sexual trauma.
So currently there's a mental health crisis within the military. The suicide rate has increased 150%. There have been more suicides than combat deaths in the last 3 years. And it's a crisis that we're working on overcoming by building a community of dignity and respect. And we're doing that locally here by organizing around the Jesse Brown VA. And I'm going to let Sabrina kind of talk a little bit about some of the work that she's been involved with and what that.
So about a month ago, we had planned an informational picket outside of the VA to bring awareness to staffing issues at the VA, to bring light to the fact that 18 veterans a day kill themselves. And the VA heard that we were going to actually work with one of their labor unions, which is National Nurses United with NNU. And the VA said, whoa, please don't do this picket. We'll sit down and listen to your demands. So we, out of good faith, we canceled the picket, sat down with them. In this meeting, we were able to speak with the director of the VA, who was a veteran himself. They had teleconferenced 2 directors from DC. They also had in 2 directors, one's from Hines and the other one was from Jesse Brown. We had 3 nurses there, one specifically that worked at Jesse Brown that I knew personally from when I was inpatient. And then we had about 4 to 5 veterans there. So we brought up our issues and our concerns, and directly out of that meeting, we were kind of able to have the director catch his breath, because he didn't realize that the women's clinic in his own building wasn't a women's clinic that was exclusively just for women. It was actually shared with another clinic. So women that would just check into the system and not know anything would walk up to a sign that says women's clinic and would walk in there, and it would be like a neurology clinic, and they'd walk into a bunch of men sitting there. And what does that do? When we said that 1 out of every 3 women in the military is sexually assaulted, they feel like they're going to go into a safe space, and they get in there to see nothing but men. And where does that put them? And we personally known females that's happened to, and they decided that they were never going to go back because that put them in an unsafe and an uncomfortable space. So again, we saw the director's mouth drop when we had to inform him that his own women's clinic was not an exclusive clinic just for women. It was actually a shared space. So we were able to come out of that meeting with them saying that they were going to make sure that that space was going to be exclusively for women, that they were going to hire 40 new nurses because there's a staffing issue, which puts us veterans who are in that hospital in unsafe and hazardous in hazardous conditions, with the nurses being overworked. What else came up in the meeting?
Investigation into sort of stuff.
So Iris was also there. Do you want to maybe
Sure. One of the other things that we were able to win out of that meeting, there were some very specific complaints and concerns about the treatment of veterans, women, patients that were going there to get psychiatric help or to get referrals for therapy, and the sole gatekeeper to that process being one therapist in particular, who several women had very bad experiences with, including myself. And so out of that meeting, we got the agreement that she would be investigated and that these complaints would be looked into further.
They also agreed to look into hire a female MST coordinator, because currently the only, please come in, sign in and come on in, grab a seat. MST coordinator is a male, and there are no female rap sessions. And so they've agreed to begin to work on implementing those things, and we're going to be having a follow-up meeting with them later on this month. And I think, overall, that was just the beginning here. It's clear that we have a long road ahead of us, but I think the most powerful thing is the ability to work with the National Nurses United, the individuals that are working at the Jesse Brown VA, and the veterans teaming up and pulling together. I'm going to kind of speak a little bit, if Sam, if you wouldn't mind reading that last poster.
Okay, so this is about GI coffee houses serving ourselves since 1967. The first GI coffee house, the UFO, was established in 1967 near Fort Jackson as a place for soldiers to gather and organize against the Vietnam War, disseminate counter-military information, enjoy entertainment, and provide support for one another. The coffee house movement grew through the 60s and 70s, but was met with military repression, and many were shut down. Today's veterans have revived the coffee house tradition in order to build community and resistance. Since 2007, GI coffee houses have started at Fort Drum, New York, the Different Drummer, North Folk, Virginia, North Folk Off Base, Fort Lewis, Coffee Strong, and Fort Hood, Under the Hood. They have saved countless lives by providing information on GI rights, counseling, and legal referrals, and a safe space to relax for veterans, service members, and their families.
So pulling from the lessons of the Immokalee workers and the history of transformative organizing, we decided to focus in at Fort Hood. And last summer we did our first outreach drive down there, where we reached out to over 300 active duty service members. And then we set up house visits with them, and we talked with them on a one-to-one basis about the crisis and about their issues and about where they were not getting the care that they needed. And through that, we began to build a case against the military's abuse of its own policies. Currently, the commander at Fort Hood is named General Campbell. He's in charge of 3rd Corps. 3rd Corps, he's written 2 policies under his own command. One is called the Medicine 1, and it specifically refers to physical profiles. Does anyone know what a profile is? Can someone speak to what that is for everybody?
Profile is just a doctor's note saying that he's unable to perform certain tasks or temporarily or permanently disabled, but with waiver still able to participate within community training to a certain extent?
So currently, it's a recommendation from a medical professional to the commander on what duties that service member can perform since they're under a specific medical condition. At Fort Hood, those policies are considered legally binding according to General Campbell's policies. However, on a daily basis, officers continually override these policies as if they're recommendations and not legally binding, which is a violation of General Campbell's own policies. Another policy that he wrote is Surgeon 01, which has to do with the stigma around military sexual trauma, around traumatic brain injury, and post-traumatic stress disorder. And we specifically feel it's really important that if these soldiers that have profiles, they go and they're seeking out help, and they get on medications, or they seek out help for post-traumatic stress disorder, and they're told that they shouldn't be carrying a weapon, and then their officer gives them a weapon, then it results in a suicide. Those are things that happen on a daily basis. And that's why the suicide rates are so high, because these officers don't follow medical recommendations of medical professionals. And so we've written a letter, the community in Fort Hood has written a letter to General Campbell. I'm just going to read it real quick. And we're asking everybody, one of the main things about this whole tour is we're asking people to sign these letters so we can send them to General Campbell, so he knows that there's a community outside of Fort Hood that cares about these abuses of service members' right to heal. It says, Dear Lieutenant General Campbell, as someone concerned about the welfare of our nation's troops, I am contacting you to express my alarm about the obstacles to care and the stigma that soldiers under your command are facing. I support the aims of Operation Recovery, a campaign for service members and veterans' right to heal, for being coordinated by Iraq Veterans Against the War and under the Hood Cafe Outreach Center. I believe that no soldier should be deployed without getting proper treatment for traumatic injuries sustained during military service, including post-traumatic stress disorder, military sexual trauma, and traumatic brain injury. Yet I believe that the right of soldiers to heal is being violated by commanders on your post, despite the existence of your command policies that are seemingly designed to protect these rights. I strongly encourage you to honor Operation Recovery's request that you hold a safety stand-down at Fort Hood to inform soldiers and officers about the command policies Med-Sen 1 on utilization of physical profiles and Surge 01, reducing stigma. Holding such a stand-down also would be an opportunity to inform the Fort Hood community about their resources available for accessing care without fear of retribution, and the means for maintaining accountability for leaders who do not follow these policies. The Command Policy Med-Sen 1 and Surge 1 are examples of standards for improving military health care, but only if they are enforced. They could be implemented on other posts to ensure better health care for service members nationwide. Having a safety stand-down can be the first step to ensuring that rhetoric of these policies matches the reality of Fort Hood. Thank you for your consideration. So the community down there is simply asking that General Campbell holds a safety stand-down on his own policies as a way to highlight the fact that service members aren't being allowed to get the care that they need. So we're asking everyone around the country to help put pressure on General Campbell to make sure that happens. And we see this only as one step in the right direction. And I think it's really clear if these generals, if General Campbell, Third Corps, the generals of NATO, can't live up to the obligations of their service members, that they're not going to be able to achieve any mission overseas. If we talk about 1/3 of the women in the military sexually assaulted, and we talk about fighting for women's rights in Afghanistan, I think we're only living the hypocrisy that is being promoted. And the reality is that this right to heal for service members and veterans isn't just a right to heal for us, but it's the right for our whole communities and society to start healing, because militarism isn't something that just service members are dealing with, it's something that we're all dealing with. It's affecting every community across the country. And so with that, I want to ask some of the other IVAW members if they want to kind of speak to what this Right to Heal campaign is about for them and why it's important to them. I don't know if Iris or Alejandro or Davey or anybody else wants to speak to that.
It's good to go down to Texas and help organize this new campaign. And throughout the years with IVAW, I met a lot of veterans, similar issues. Just looking at the extent of trauma and depression. And I had suffered through depression on myself. And it was because of the stigma I decided to seek help outside the military. For one, I was still struggling with the moral values of the war. And, my position as a sergeant in the military, I didn't want to seem weak in the eyes of my leadership. I was unable to take on orders or carry out missions. But knowing the extent of this, and officers have used this as soldiers malingering, falsifying disorders or just mental health problems, and it just helps that this is providing another hand out there to help out soldiers and get them the help that they deserve, they need, and educate our generals and our officers that this is not a little matter. It's very important, as you can see in the number of suicides.
I can share a little bit. Looking at I work at a nonprofit agency where we do counseling, veterans counseling, and creative arts therapy with veterans. And one of the main reasons veterans come to us and our agency is because they either can't and won't go to the VA, or because they're not eligible for service in the VA. We have individuals that had been deployed once, twice, 3 times, and decided that the 4th time wasn't going to happen, that they were going to go home to their families because they had had enough, and they go UA, and then they get, or AWOL, and they get a negative discharge, so they're not eligible for services at the VA because of their discharge, but they still come home with these traumas. I myself was deployed early on in the war in January 2002. I was not in a combat zone. I was in a support position, but I was sexually assaulted. And I had to remain in theater for another 6-7 months after it happened, alongside the Marine that assaulted me. And these are the things that people see every day. These are the things that service members deal with. And I luckily didn't have to redeploy, but other folks go through this. And it's not just women being assaulted, it's other men being assaulted, and they come back to the States. They get, there's that stigma around reporting it. If they do report it and get any help, a lot of them resort to other than legal measures, and they just leave because they can't deal with it. Or they stick around and they get redeployed and go through it all over again for 1 more deployment, for 2 more deployments. And if we talk about supporting the troops or, taking care of your units, I know Alejandro mentioned trying to seem strong as a leader, as a military leader, a sergeant, or whatever it is. We all kind of get that ingrained in us, in that culture, to be able to take care of your service members, your brothers and sisters in arms. But we are failing horribly at doing that in the service and outside of the service. And the VA is not up to par. The VA is not taking care of the troops when they come home either. So this is a really important campaign to support and hold these officials accountable.
So we're asking everybody if, I don't know if everybody has one of these. I can go grab a bunch more. We're asking if everybody could sign this letter to General Campbell. It's really crucial that he knows that it's not just service members down at Fort Hood, but it's people around the country, because his promotion depends on a congressional promotion. If he sees that people around the country know who his name is, he's going to take it seriously. Whereas he doesn't even take his service members that seriously, and that's seen in the fact that last year 22 service members under his command committed suicide. So I think any other institution, whether it was a university or a corporation that had 22 suicides under its control, I think would automatically be under mass investigations by multiple forms of media, and unfortunately within the military, it's just a standard operating procedure. So I'll pass these around, and in order to continue our outreach drive next year at Fort Hood, we really need financial support. And I understand that everyone's in a financial hard time right now, but if people don't have funds, you can become a sustaining donor and donate $5 a month, donate $10 a month, and I'll pass those forms around to everybody. But right now, I'd just kind of like to open it up to discussion and comments and questions about who we are as an organization, what we're doing, and why this campaign is so important.
I have a question. This might be a dumb question, but I'm just trying to understand everything. So I was reading the facts, and I see that like a lot of the resources are overwhelmed. That there's few social workers or few mental health workers, and you had mentioned seeking services outside of the VA. Is that right? So what is kind of that? So if they're, I guess I don't know what I'm trying to say. Like if they're really overwhelmed, do soldiers have recourses like through insurance and so on and so forth to see private providers, or is it something that they would prefer to see somebody at the VA, or like how does that kind of flesh out, if that makes sense?
Well, I think at first it's important to distinguish between active duty and veterans. So they're completely two different bodies of the government. The Department of Defense is responsible for everyone that's on active duty service, and every time we talk about a new defense bill or appropriations bill for defense, none of that money goes to the VA. The VA is a different department. It's the Veterans Administration's department of the government. And I think maybe some of the, I know Crystal recently got off active duty, and maybe she can speak more directly to the type of care that people have and what options people have. But I think overall there are token programs for post-traumatic stress disorder and other things at active duty bases. But the reality is that most service members don't have access to them, or even if they did, that their command says, well, it says you have a doctor's appointment this time, but you're supposed to be on duty. And if someone's profile is able to be violated on a daily basis, it doesn't matter if they need to go see a counselor, because their commander can say, actually, it's more important that you stand in the motor pool for the next 12 hours than go see your counselor, which is something that happens on a daily basis. So, Crystal, do you want to talk at all about active duty stuff at Fort Hood?
Yeah, so on Fort Hood, I was stationed there for a little over 5.5 years. I deployed twice out of there. And numerous people's profiles in my unit were violated, like Aaron said, on a daily basis. There was one specific instance where, upon coming back from my first deployment in 2006, I worked with a guy named PFC Fish, and he went and started seeking mental health for things that happened to him during our deployment. He was only 18 years old at the time, 19 years old by the time we got back. And he was dealing with a lot of suicidal thoughts, depression, PTSD, things like this. And he was seeking services from the base on Fort Hood. For a while, that was working out okay for him. He was getting to see a counselor and things like that. And then our unit started to give him a hard time about it, started not letting him go to his appointments, started putting him on extra duty, started ridiculing him for seeking services and stuff. But he knew he really needed this help, so he kept going. Excuse me. Shortly after about 8 months or so after he's been seeking this treatment, he, along with myself and a bunch of other people in my unit, are known as what is stop lost, where your contract's involuntarily extended by the government. So like Fish, myself, a bunch of other people were all scheduled to get out in June of 2008. And the Army said, oh no, just kidding, you're getting deployed in June of 2008 now. You're not getting out of the Army. So
he had a profile saying that he was not supposed to do any sort of weapons training, he was not supposed to go on any field exercises, he was not to carry a weapon, he was not to be around ammunition. His specialty, his MOS, was actually an ammunition specialist, so that was his job, was to work with ammo, and he was not supposed to go on any deployments. Well, once our stop loss went into effect, he was put on a list to go to this training site with the rest of our brigade to White Sands, which is a field artillery training base on the border of New Mexico and El Paso, Texas. And he tried to get out of it and said, look, I have this profile that says I shouldn't be going, I have all these appointments, I can't miss, why are you sending me out here? Unit didn't care, sent him anyways. 2 days into the training exercise, we went to formation, Fish was missing, there was a note on his bed that said, I'm not coming back. We spent 3 or 4 days looking for him in the desert in the middle of nowhere in New Mexico and Texas, and eventually found him. He had killed himself with a 249, a squad automatic weapon, and that was it. Our unit never got any sort of repercussions for it. No one in the chain of command was held responsible. Nothing. It was pretty much all just swept under the rug and said, oh, poor Fish, that poor crazy kid, oh well, no big deal. And like I said, he had a profile from doctors and from psychologists and from therapists saying, you know, he should not be pushed to these limits. You're pushing this guy way beyond the point of where he needs to be. And he ended up killing himself because of it. And nothing happened to anyone in our chain of command. And unfortunately, this is not uncommon. I'm not the only person that has stories like this. I'm sure a lot of the veterans in the room here, along with myself, can say that they've lost more friends to suicide or suicide attempts than they have in combat. And this is something that's been going on for decades and for generations, and no one up top is being held responsible, and that's kind of where Operation Recovery is trying to put the heat and trying to get these people to take responsibility for the things that they're doing.
And I'll chime in on like the veteran status. Last year, and I can't look this way at the camera because I suffer from horrible migraines, but last year I was hospitalized 7 times within a 12-month period, 2 times on the medical side and 5 on the psych side. And Miss Marshall, who just walked in, happens to be one of the nurses that was on the psych ward with me. So to be working with her now, like, I know that there's good stuff that's going to come out of this. But being the first couple stays on the psych side, like a lot of stuff was having adverse reactions to the medication they were giving me for migraines. So during the first couple stays, it was really delusional. Like I couldn't tell. But like I would go in one day and they'd let me go and I'd be back in. Like I'd leave on a Friday, after afternoon time, and I'd be back Saturday morning. It was the last time that I was up there where I was at a normal state, got a lot of the medication out of my system, and I started speaking out about our services. We go to like a formation, we go to like this group meeting, and they would tell us like our breakdown for the day. And so normally you have like a certain amount of different therapy sessions that you go through throughout the day. And so we get in there and they're like, okay, you're gonna have this group today, and right after this you're gonna break into your individual groups. And then after that, like the 2 other counseling sessions that you had that day got canceled because somebody, wasn't in town and there was some funding issues or whatever. So I get into our only group that day. And so we sat there for a little bit, and the social worker was the facilitator, didn't say anything, like didn't spark any conversations, and one of the older veterans that was next to me was like, somebody say something. So I was like, well, I have something to say. Like, what are you going to do for us today? Here we are inpatient, and you just canceled 2 of our programs. Like, what are you gonna do for us today, to help us heal, like to help us get to a stable point so we don't have to be here? And so we got into, discussions with that, and I brought up the fact that we spend more than a third of our tax dollars on the wars, because he talked about shortcomings and he talked about budget issues, and the VA is hurting for money. And so I said, if we spend, a third of our tax dollars on the wars, they can make money for these wars, but they can't seem to find money to take care of the warriors. He immediately shut me down, brought up some personal issues, how I've always had problems with my therapist, which I've had some really outstanding therapists outside of the VA, like through the Soldier Project. So after I got out, I went and reviewed my notes, and he said that I led an insurrection during that group. So when I first got in there, there was documentations that I wouldn't say anything. I wouldn't complain what my problems were most of the time because I was delusional and I couldn't even verbalize it because I didn't know what was going on. And when I finally did speak out, like I was an insurrectionist. So like, and I was a patient just concerned about the fact that like our programs got cut. So I also got out and they said that I would need intense therapy. And so through the Soldier Project, I was able to see a therapist twice a week. Soldier Project is like mental health clinicians that volunteer their time. So since I had all these other medical appointments with neurology and everything else going on with my migraines, I figured I might as well just seek mental health while I'm there, since I'm there 4 days a week. And I need this intense therapy, right? So I go to check into the therapist, and I can only see him once every 2 weeks. So they're telling me I need intense therapy, but I can't get those services because they're short-staffed, because they don't have the funds, or whatever reasons they decide. And I would see him like at crazy hours, like 6 o'clock at night. So what does that mean? So yeah, there's just a lot of issues with that, and that's why Operation Recovery and this Right to Heal tour is important to me, because this is what's going on. Like you don't get to hear this unless we're out speaking about this. Unfortunately, there aren't other organizations that are willing to tackle this. You don't see the VFW going out and saying like, hey, let's hear the veterans' voices. You don't see American Legion say, hey, let's hear the veterans' voices. They're focused on like, let's do this dinner dance, or let's do this banquet, let's do this convention. And these are important topics. So with that said, I am a disabled veteran. I'm gonna drop my money into this. It does take money to run this. So we're gonna pass this hat. We would really, really appreciate if you can give $1, $2, $10, $20, or if you can match the money that I put in here. That would be awesome. It takes money to do what we do when it comes to printing, it comes to mailing these letters. We're going to take them, sign them, we're going to personally mail them to make sure that General Campbell gets them, so that he knows these voices throughout the nation are being heard, and we're going to put pressure on him to make some real change.
Thanks, Sabrina. So we had the pleasure of working at the Jesse Brown VA with Adelina, and I just want to invite you to maybe share in some of that struggle, and also maybe talk a little bit about what's going on at the VA from the nurse's perspective, and how you all see your work.
I am Adelina Marshall. I'm a nurse, RN at Jesse Brown VA. I work mental health. I'm also the director of NMU, which is a union that represents RNs there. As you stated, we did have a meeting, and some of the things that came out of that meeting was that the VA director, Mrs. Tolles, who was very resistant to us and some of our concerns about patient care. I am now dealing directly with the person who's over her, Mr. Falk, and we also have a new associate director of inpatient, Molly, who seems to be a little more attuned to patient care there. She's an educator, so we have an ear there. We're supposed to have regular meetings set up with the faculty director. Wednesday, I'm supposed to meet with Mr. Falk. However, he'll be gone, so I will be meeting with actually Ms. Tolles and hopefully Molly. And I do have some concerns. I feel after our meeting that we left the meeting feeling very empowered and hopeful. And just recently, we had an incident in a spirituality group where one of the male patients ended up supposedly hugging the patient, but the patient complained that he had kissed her. And so I just don't feel that they've reached out enough to all of the people involved with care on that unit to send a strong enough message. So I will be bringing that up this Wednesday, because she did have a lot of problems dealing with that situation. Let me see what else is going on. They're supposed to be looking at staffing levels, and so they gave me some stats for mental health, and this is throughout the hospital though. We have extreme shortages. I mean, just the other night, I had, just last night, we had 3 RNs, one had 10 patients, I had 11, and another one had 12. And on top of that, a patient, is complaining of chest pains and things, and we still don't have the auxiliary staff, so if somebody's on one-to-one, we still don't, we're still having problems getting sitters and stuff for our patients. As far as bullying, intimidating tactics, they are still going on. If you report a concern about patient care there is still intimidating staff, holding, say, their vacation time hostage. We have one nurse, last Tuesday was Nurses Week, and so I had a table and a lot of nurses were coming up and one had a mask on. And I was like, what do you got that mask? And she had been sick, and she did bring a doctor's excuse. She's not abusive to sick time or anything, but her manager was disciplining her for calling in sick. So now she's wearing a mask while she's taking care of patients, where she should not be there because some of our patient population is really, really sick, and you don't want to infect them with something. And so I'm going to address that also Wednesday. Let's see. They supposed to be hiring. They did release some positions, but I'm not pleased with that either because, especially on mental health, they have what they call traveling nurses. So they go from one VA to another. Mm-hmm. And what I found in the past that they don't have to accept that assignment. So I wouldn't mind having them so they could relieve for vacation coverage, sick coverage, things like that. But my concern is they're going to try to use that as part of the staffing, and then once they think this is all blown down, which I'm not going to let it go, but that they will end up not keeping them. So we still have shortages. I really haven't seen them advertise for mental health, although they keep telling me what they're going to do. I haven't seen any plans, and they haven't got back with me on those plans. So these are issues that I'm going to bring forth Wednesday, and I'm going to be very firm on that. I've also, and I know it takes time, the VA, government, anything takes so much time, but I don't think it takes that much time to email your staff, your managers, or pick up the phone in your daily meetings with them to let them understand that we expect to have coverage. Now, last week on our unit, we had 2 RNs with 30 patients because they did not plan forward for, which they were told this person wasn't going to be in, and so they were still down to 2. And I have copies of the assignments and of the people so I can verify everything. So the staffing methodology, I have somebody who's a statistician that we're going to look very closely at the numbers they're giving us because we think that they're using, like for instance, if you don't take your vacation, then they're going to use that as part of their staffing, which they shouldn't. They have to allow for that and for sick calls and stuff. So we're going to be looking at very carefully. And they will understand that we're going to hold them to the agreement. I just think, too, that we should have set up a schedule. Did you guys do that? When I was looking back over things, you did?
Yeah, there's going to be a follow-up meeting later this month.
This month?
What's it with the Adeline? Yeah, Naya.
Okay. So did he get back in touch with you on that? Because I'm not aware.
Yeah, so after the meeting, we were following up with Mr. Anaya, who's the head of director, and we're making sure that he's going to live up to his half the bargain. And if he's not, we'll be back in the streets with the nurses. And it's clear that there's just a ton of going on at the VA that's not being addressed. I mean, 30 patients and 2 people to handle that it's just not safe for anyone involved. And this is something that we're like dealing with on an ongoing basis. And the administration, on administration level, they are knowingly putting patients and nurses in these positions, and so we're working to hold them accountable, and we're expecting them to make the changes that they said. They still haven't posted all the jobs that they said that they were going to post, and so we'll be asking them to. We've already asked them to send all the links to the events, and we're hoping that all that comes together. But we're going to keep holding them accountable, otherwise we'll be in the streets. And
well, they're also pulling from our mental health, and what happens is, for us, if we have a low census, that means we will be admitting constantly, and by them pulling, if I'm admitting, say we have 3 RNs, and we're off the unit admitting in the exam room and stuff, so we cannot be there monitoring, and then if we don't have, coverage for us to take our lunch breaks and stuff like that, which they're not providing. So, in essence, we get fatigued too. And it's really a challenge to manage that many patients and not have the adequate staffing. And we did have a high population again on that unit that you're on with females. And again, no one did separate groups or anything. So in defense, though, of what's going on, they just had JACO comes and inspect all the hospitals. And I actually think that should become another avenue for us to address, because supposedly it was unannounced, but it wasn't. They all knew they were coming. So they tend to try to spruce up everything during that period of time, but I think that might be another avenue for us to look at too, especially for you guys.
Yeah, and again, I just want to say, I was there last year, so this is a year later, and these issues are still happening with these short staffing issues. But more importantly, she's specifically talking about the mental health floor and inpatient. And we're in the midst of a suicide epidemic where 18 veterans a day are killing themselves, and the VA is not taking care of our veterans. Here's a voice, here's a leader at the VA that's saying this, and they're not acknowledging her voice, and they're not giving her the respect. And I was a patient on the floor telling them the same thing. I didn't serve in Iraq and Afghanistan. I actually deployed during Kosovo, so my war is completely different than today's wars. But I was telling them, you're not prepared. You're not ready to handle the influx of veterans that are coming back, and what are you going to do? And they immediately shut me down and call me an insurrectionist.
Well,
so that's...
When I'm there, I'm trying to encourage our female vets to have a voice. And on Sundays, we do a rap group, and I talk to the vets. I usually am working Sunday. So I'm trying to empower them, and I'm trying to get them to also join this organization so that they will have a voice there. And I'm talking to our staff to let them know. But one of my biggest problems there is intimidation of the staff. When they fill out those ADOs, even though, to Mr. Falk's credit, he piggybacked on one of my emails and encouraged them so we can get stats from that, but they're still very intimidating and filling it out.
So you've heard it from both sides of the aisle about the crisis at the VA, and it's good this work is not going away. This is just the beginning of our work here, and we're really hoping that everybody in this room can be a part of our fight for our right to heal here in Chicago and at the Jesse Brown VA. Just are there other? Let's open it up for other folks' questions and comments. There are.
Going back to the situation at Fort Hood, if they've got a general order in place that says that they're supposed to recognize these policy letters, whatever they say, it just it sort of seems like it has to be going on in the open, that they're officially you're supposed to honor these letters, but wink wink, what's really important is getting your numbers up so you can deploy at the staffing levels we want you to deploy at. That sort of has to be going on. If they want to make it the top priority, they make whatever they want the top priority.
Right, that's essentially what they're doing. They have all these orders and these rules and things, that said you're supposed to honor medical profile, and you're supposed to honor doctor's notes. But then there's a small little clause right there that says, oh, but it's commanded and discretion. So you have to honor these unless the commander says you don't. So
Right,
if the
and
commander's saying you don't have to do it, they're not doing it, and that's how they get around it.
Are they not honoring them just because they're personally vindictive?
Can I talk to
Yeah.
that? I may not be able to answer that specifically if they're being personally vindictive, but there's a lot of, well, maybe not a lot. There's some research that's gone into the jobs of specifically the mental health providers that are active duty. Because if your doctor or your clinician or whomever is, say he's a Navy lieutenant something or other, some officer, their primary job is the mission. They are, whatever rank they are, they have their own chain of command, and their first duty is their service to the Navy. And I say the Navy because I think most of the doctors are naval doctors, but I don't know how it works in the Army. But it's the same thing.
The Army has their own doctors. The Marine Corps is the one that uses
the
Navy
Marine Corps
doctors.
doesn't.
She's a Marine.
Yeah. The Navy does everything. They give us a ride everywhere and all that.
But it's,
And we pay.
But that's the catch, is because they're also active duty.
but what was described was situations where the soldier has the letter saying, I mean, like she said with Fish, is that the guy wasn't supposed to be handling weapons. He accessed weapons or accessed ammunition, and they just said, yeah, whatever.
Well, here's a really, this is like maybe on a really small scale. I had 4 wisdom teeth pulled out when I was on active duty. I had to leave the dental office, take whatever, painkiller shots they give you, go back to my command to show them the dental chip that says I can go home for 4 days and sleep it off. But in the meantime, I had to bring it to my sergeant, who had to show it to the gunnery sergeant, who had to show it to the lieutenant, who had to show it to the captain before he could sign off on it. They all go to lunch, they play golf, they do whatever they do. I didn't get home till like 6 hours later. My face was swollen and trying to drive through this pain. That's just a wisdom tooth. They don't really give it. If you have something that isn't even visible, and that's why I brought up the point of these mental health practitioners that are working for the Navy or the service, first and foremost, their job isn't really to stop you from deploying until you can heal. Their job is to get you as close to that line to make you deployable as possible. That's really their job. And so with the way the chain of command works and the way, your fear of jumping that chain of command, a lot of service members don't know what's the process. If my sergeant doesn't, take care of me, who's the next person I should talk to? Because you don't get taught that. You get taught, you talk to your direct supervisor, and that's it. You don't jump that chain of command, it's disrespectful, etc. So if your sergeant has your chip and throws it in some desk drawer and then goes play golf with the lieutenant, nobody cares. Nobody sees it. They might read it, they might not. It gets lost in a shuffle, and then some guy winds up killing himself in the desert. When I deployed in 2002, in January 2002, I was on a limited duty board for a physical ailment. I was just recovering from a broken leg and a surgery, etc. They sped it up. They sped up that process. They said, well, you're good enough, you can walk. You may not be able to run, we'll try not to make you run. Just things like that, where they kind of push it to the extreme limit to make you deployable, or as close to deployable as possible, or just outright ignore the letter from the command.
And just to be clear, the commanders, the command at Fort Hood knows this, and they know that there's a crisis going on, and they're completely aware of these things. And that's why this policy that General Campbell wrote himself is supposed to take care of that, but simultaneously he's not enforcing it. So as Crystal said, profiles are considered underneath the UMCJ as a recommendation. But the reality is, with this policy, they're not a recommendation. They're legally binding. And despite that, he's not living up to his own policies, and he's not enforcing that. And any officer or NCO that violates someone's profile is not going to be held accountable. And when no one's going to be held accountable, the perpetuation of stigma just continues and grows. And that's what we're seeing there. That's why it's not just about the profiles, it's also about the stigma. Because once you are diagnosed, once you're on Seroquel, Trazodone, Klonopin, once you are taking these medications and you don't show up to formation on time, you're seen as a bad soldier. You're seen as a bad apple. You're seen as the problem. And so then they start working on pushing you out of the military, or like writing you up, or setting you up for failure. So, and that's a continuous structure that's happening, which leads to many cases where service members are getting put out without honorable discharges, simply because they were shot in Iraq, and now they're on painkillers that make it hard for them to get up in the morning, so they're not showing up to formation on time. So then they have a series of counselings that pushes them out of the military. I mean, this is kind of like the standard operating procedure right now that's happening within the military, and it's on an epic level that we're seeing this crisis just kind of bubble out. And that's what we're trying to expose, is that all these generals that talk so much about these care are simultaneously pushing, like, not living up to their own standards. And so we're trying to use military law and the legal structure of the military against itself. We're trying to say, General Campbell, if you can't live up to your own policies, how are you going to be responsible for conducting operations in Iraq or Afghanistan? Let's get serious. And if anybody can expect to like promote this general to a 4-star, they got to be kidding. So,
do we know anything about who's this on the promotion panel?
yes, it's a Senate Armed Service Committee. Well, are there any other closing comments that anyone from Adelina or any of the veterans want to make?
One thing that we're starting to see too is that a lot of veterans are coming back and they're dependent on pain medication, like you were saying. So they are, probably medicating them heavily, and then we start seeing them coming back in on Vicodin, on these stronger pain medications, and it's because they medicated them so heavily with that while you were in. So now you're discharged, and now you have a dependency and an addiction.
Yeah. I have a question regarding that. Do you know anything about any AA or NA programs available at the VA?
We do have them at the VA. However, I advocate to have more on our inpatient because some of our patients are there for a couple of weeks, and I think that they should start, those programs should be available to them when they come in. And but they do have it on days, and I'm trying to advocate to have a social worker on the evening shift so that they're not backlogged from the day. Because during the day, they're in groups, they're meeting with doctors and psychologists. A lot of times, they don't have enough time to meet with them. So in the evening, maybe if they could get somebody from, say, 4 to 8 or 4 to 7, and on the weekend, then I think it would add a lot to our veterans because it helps them with their all kind of programs that's available. And if we don't have anybody there, and I think right now we only have 2 social workers, and so we do need social workers too.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks for speaking.